Logical reasoning time.
Let's do it.
Prep test 65, section 4, question 11, if you're playing along at home. This would be a good time to pause the show, pause the video, pause the podcast, and actually attempt this question on your own. Try to get it right, and then listen to us explain it. How do you want to do this?
For some reason, I was just imagining someone driving and doing that. And I'm like, no one would ever do that. But then, we just do stupid things sometimes. We're like, oh, I have the demon. I can find this. No, you can't. Put your phone down. Okay. Rolanda. Oh, I'm reading it, right? Sorry.
Yeah, go.
Imminent death. Rolanda, the house on Oak Avenue has a larger yard than any other house we've looked at in Prairie View. So that's the best one to rent. Okay, so if the size of the yard is the only thing that matters, then and large is better than small, then this makes sense. But it seems like there could be so many other things that matter. That's what I'm thinking.
Yep. Immediately, you should be trying to attack that. Rolanda has provided a premise that the house on Oak Avenue has a larger yard than any other house we've looked at in Prairie View. Her conclusion is that's the best one to rent. She uses the word so there, which tells us that she has provided a premise before the so, and then a conclusion after the so. And our job on LSAT logical reasoning is to call bullshit on people's conclusions. So I'm not arguing that, yeah, this one has the biggest yard. I'll give you that. Biggest yard of the ones you've looked at, by the way. It doesn't mean it has the biggest yard, period. It has the biggest yard of the ones you've looked at.
Yeah, yep. That's a problem too.
And then her conclusion is, so that's the best one to rent. She doesn't say, so that's the best one of the ones we've looked at to rent. She says, that's the best one to rent, period.
That's a big problem. Yeah.
Which is a potential problem, right? So one objection is, well, what about the ones we haven't looked at yet? But another good objection, and Ben already alluded to this, what if I don't want to mow that big of a damn lawn? Right? Why is bigger yard necessarily better?
Yeah.
Now, if you have, llamas and shit, then great. Two birds with one stone, by the way. The big yard is nice for the llamas, and they probably eat your grass, so you don't have to mow it. The first thing I thought of was, what if the house itself is a piece of shit?
Well, that's what I was imagining. I was also imagining, I just saw a house the other day where the vines were growing up over the front door, and it's like, clearly no one lives there. What if you have shit like that?
Right. Giant holes in the roof. Yeah. And just the plumbing is just leaking and the foundation is crumbling. And, there's a lot of reasons why this, what about the neighbors, Ben? Frat house next door. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons not to rent this house just because it has the biggest yard. Okay, keep going. Yeah. What does Tom say?
Tom, no, it isn't.
Whoa.
In other words, it's not the best.
Yeah.
Its yard isn't really as big as it looks.
Oh, no, you're going to stop right there, I would imagine.
I would, because she said it has a larger yard than any other house we've looked at. So I'm not arguing with her about the size of the yard, at least for the ones that she's looked at.
But Tom is.
Yeah, Tom is. Tom is going after her evidence, which is interesting, but okay.
Well, on an agree-disagree question, which I assume that's what this is, it might not be, but normally when there's more than one speaker, we're going to be asked what they're agreeing about and what they're disagreeing about. And one of the things that's useful to think about is, are they arguing about premises or conclusions or both?
Yep.
Here, I think it's both.
It's both, because the no, it isn't is saying, no, it's not the best. So Tom is going after her conclusion, but then saying the yard isn't really as big as it looks is going after evidence. So he's like, look, Rolanda, you're wrong on both counts.
Yeah, Tom is disagreeing with every single thing Rolanda said.
This is kind of like a Democrat and a Republican talking about the election.
Yeah, really. All right, keep going.
Property lines in Prairie View actually start 20 feet from the street. Jeez, this is horrible. So what looks like part of the yard is really city property. Well, that's going to be true for every freaking property. So even if she's wrong about this one, I don't know. I don't like Tom. Honestly.
Right. One would assume, yeah, that I mean, if this applies to one house in Prairie View, then why wouldn't it apply to all the other houses in Prairie View? And then what does Rolanda say back?
But that's, oh, thank you, Rolanda. But that's
Right.
true of all the other properties we've looked at too. Which, by the way, if you're a proactive reader in the LSAT, which you should be, and you're having these reactions and you're engaging with the text, then a lot of times the subsequent sentences either repeat what you thought or tweak it a little bit. But either way, you're hypersensitive to what they're saying. It makes sense, which is why I think a lot of people can go faster, ironically, when they slow down and try to understand, because the subsequent sentences are digested faster.
Slow down to speed up, and that's our number one reading comprehension tip. What Ben did there, what we both did there, and really anybody who's any good at the LSAT at all did what we did here, which was predict what Rolanda was going to say back. You should, on the reading comp, half the time, you should be finding, you should, not that you're going to predict everything that's going to come in the remainder of the passage, but when you're halfway done with the passage, you should have some ideas about what you're going to read in the second half of the passage.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't, you should be very frequently like, oh yeah, okay, I knew they were going to say that. Once in a while, you should be like, oh shit, I thought they were going to say XYZ, but instead they said ZYX. And that's an interesting tweak on what I thought they were going to say.
Yeah.
If you're not having that reaction, then you're just not engaging enough in what you're reading, and you're not comprehending because you're not actually engaged. You're just not actually reading it. I think,
Yeah.
you know, any rational critical thinker here would have objected to Tom's statement in the way Ben did. And then you read Rolanda's statement and you go, yeah, okay, great. Rolanda's with it. We are hashtag Team Rolanda here, clearly, after reading this exchange.
We are on her team in regards to this point. That said, we still disagree with her original conclusion.
Oh yeah, we're not
You're
saying
like,
that
they're
this
both
is
idiots.
definitely the best one to rent. But in the logical spat she's having with Tom here, she has destroyed Tom. I mean, we're not listening to Tom anymore.
Yeah.
She has demonstrated Tom's dumb logic.
Yep.
All right, let's answer the question.
Rolanda's response to Tom suggests that Tom commits which one of the following reasoning errors? Okay, this is a flaw question.
Yep.
And it's specifically asking about Tom's error in reasoning.
Yep.
So we're going to look for Tom's failure, and it's failing. I don't have a flaw name for this.
We didn't study rhetoric.
Oh,
we don't give a shit about rhetoric. We don't give a shit about formal logic. I don't have a name for this.
If I'd gotten that certificate, I would say that Tom's flaw is not realizing that a characteristic of one thing is actually true for all of them, so you can't compare them. That's even me going like wordy. Just that he didn't think about how this one thing is actually true for all things. I don't know.
Yeah,
something like that.
I'm looking for an answer that just describes, hey man, doesn't this apply to all the houses in town?
Yep.
We made an objection to one particular house, but that objection probably applies to all the houses. So that's beside the point.
Yep.
You know what that's like? In the presidential election of 2020, frequently I heard Trump supporters talking about how old Biden is. Trump's old as fuck too. So why would neither side is allowed to pick on the age of the other candidate when they're both crusty old white dudes?
Yeah. I will say though that Trump is more, he doesn't make as many, like he can speak more clearly. I mean, he speaks simply. I'm not saying I agree with what he's saying, but he's a lot more like, but I just can't understand. I'm like voting for Biden as he like stumbles over pretty much everything he ever says.
Who would win in a vocabulary test?
Oh, I'm sure that Biden would, but he's not, he's losing his mind. I have to agree with the Trump supporters. He's old as anyway.
Either one of them they're going to be the oldest president we've ever had.
Really? Wow.
Yes. Good job, 2020.
Yeah, good job. Thanks, America. Well, actually, thanks, Democrats. Like, why we could have served up anybody, and
By the
that's who
way,
you.
I want to make it clear that I am not a Democrat.
I'm not a Democrat. I'm actually a registered Republican, but
Oh,
I don't
okay.
understand why the Democrats chose Biden. To me, it's all insider, whatever, and it's a disappointment. I
I
would
think
have
they
been so
thought
much
they
more
were
excited for like some of those younger folks.
literally anyone else.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to go through these answer
Tangent.
choices?
Sorry.
Tangent.
Answer
What did
choice A.
Rolanda, sorry, what did Tom do wrong?
He fails to take into account the possibility that there are advantages to having a small yard.
Mm.
Never talked about the advantages or disadvantages.
The problem with A is that, I mean, the fact that there might be advantages to having a small yard is an objection that we had right off the bat to Rolanda's logic.
Yeah.
Right. So A is on target, but it's attacking Rolanda's logic. And we were asked to attack Tom's logic, or not really to attack it, but to describe a flaw in Tom's logic. A, I think, is a pretty good objection you could make to Rolanda. And maybe it's a flaw in Rolanda's argument, but we are asked here specifically for a flaw in Tom's argument.
B, he presumes without providing justification that the property that belongs to the city is available for private use. Oh, that property that belongs to the city is available for private use. I'm sorry, what does this have to do with anything? Oh, I see, the 20 feet.
If anything,
No.
he does the opposite of that, right?
He assumes that it's not available for private use
Right.
and therefore should not be considered.
Right.
All right. C, he improperly applies a generalization to an instance that it was not intended to cover. Okay, that's interesting. I could see how people might be tempted by this. They're like, oh, the generalization that this is happening everywhere, and he applies it to a specific instance, this property. But we,
if anything,
one, he's not thinking about it as a generalization. He's thinking
right.
about it as a specific case.
I think it's the reverse of C. He's talking about this specific case while ignoring the possibility that this is a general rule.
Yeah. Yeah. D, he fails to apply a general rule to all relevant cases, relevant instances. Yes, that's what he did. So I would say D is the answer, but just to check, E, he presumes without providing justification that whatever is true of a part of a thing is also true of the whole. No, again, I mean, this is like mixing different things, but if anything, this is the opposite because he only focused on the part, not the whole.
Yeah, I mean, he stated a general principle. He said property lines in Prairie View actually start 20 feet from the street.
Yeah.
That's a statement about property lines in Prairie View. Does it apply to this one house? Yes, it does. The problem is it also applies to all the other houses in Prairie View, and he seems like he forgot that, weirdly.
Yep. Yeah.
So he has failed to apply a general rule to all relevant instances. The other relevant instances here being every other house they've looked at in Prairie View. So the answer is D. And that's it.
Sweet.